management welcome you today, whether you're joining this evening from the USA or this morning from the Southeast Asia, to the Virtual Business Matchmaking and More series of the Global Access Program. Now in its 7th year, the GAP program started in collaboration with the US Small Business Administration to connect our small and medium enterprise leaders with the growth opportunities in the emerging and global markets, backed by the customized research from our highly accomplished group of students. Today's event is focused on the global opportunities for collaboration with the South Korean, Singapore, and the Philippines in the area of healthcare products, medical devices, and life science technologies. The new virtual avatar of the Global Access Program as a monthly series of events has become possible through the generous support from the Jack H. Brown College of Business and Public Administration. My colleague, Dr. Franklin, and I will now call out key collaborators. We request when your name is called, please open your video and wave your hand to say hello. First, a big shout out for Dean Lawrence C. Rose, a staunch advocate of the value this program adds to our students, campus, and the community. I will then like to call out Dr. Sarita Jackson of the Global Research Institute of International Trade that offers international trade consulting, Luis Jimenez of the Australia-headquartered Brandwood that offers international regulatory consulting, and Ferdinand Soriano of Planet 63 that offers international logistics services, who are part of the Center's advisory leadership team for the GAP program.
I, Franklin, professor and co-director of the CSUSB's Center for Global Management. Add my words of welcome to all the panelists, industry leaders and facilitators, members of the industry associations and the chambers of commerce, government officers, students, and faculty. I would like to acknowledge the immense collaborative support of the Los Angeles, South Korea Consulate, Consul Sun Sun Sun.
Hello, nice to meet you. My name is Sung Soo Son. I am Korean consul.
Thank you. And the Los Angeles, Philippines Consulate and the Washington, D.C.'s office, Consul Ria Oreta. And the Enterprise Singapore, Fiona Bay. A special thanks to Cheryl Quintana, President, Philippine Franchise Association.
Hello, everyone.
William Choi, CEO of Seoul-based Posture 360.
Good morning and good evening, everybody.
And Olive Tai, co-founder of Singapore-based Synergy, for joining us as the expert panelist.
Hello, everyone.
The backbone for this entire event is our center's coordinator and senior communication specialist, Jamie Ayala. Please join me in inviting my dear friend, Paul Smith, Small Business Administration, to introduce our keynote speaker. Paul.
Very good. Good morning and good afternoon to everyone. I'm an economic development specialist and district international trade officer with the U.S. Small Business Administration, affiliated with the Orange County Inland Empire District Office. Just a moment, the SBA is a very robust agency established Americans to start and grow their business. Of late, you may have heard a lot about us on the news. The SBA is a very robust agency established to assist Americans start and grow businesses. We provide management and technical assistance, contracting assistance, and access to capital, both domestic and international. For this particular program, we're doing quite a bit of work in innovation, technology transfer, and support through a number of programs. And a very heartfelt thanks to the group here today that I've worked with for the last 7 years to bring this program forward. At this time, I'd like to introduce Mr. Luis Jimenez, who is the Vice President of Brandwood CKC, a regulatory affairs consulting firm with home offices in Australia and locations around the world. Mr. Jimenez is also the President of Orange County Regulatory Affairs Association and a really great team member in the community. And more importantly, in addition, he's got firsthand knowledge of being an entrepreneur and launching his own business in the medical and the health science sector. At this time, I'd like to turn the program over to our keynote speaker, Mr. Jimenez.
Thank you very much for that, Paul. Kind introduction. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, everybody, for joining. I will be sharing my screen here in a second, but I'm just really pleased to have the opportunity to share with you. I've titled my presentation, Efficient Registration and Commercialization Strategies of Healthcare Products for South Korea, Philippines, and Singapore. In doing so, I faced myself with a little bit of a challenge, how to fit all of this in 15 minutes, but we'll do our best. The way I do slides is to provide just a little bit of a catch of interest and attention, and then there's resources so people can do their homework afterwards. So I just sort of introduced the topic. A little bit further about our firm. As Paul mentioned, we're headquartered in Sydney, Australia. We do international regulatory consulting. I'm based in the LA office, but we do registration for medical devices, diagnostics, and pharmaceuticals at a global level. So we'll try to bring some of that flavor into how we will cover the topic today. What we do is end-to-end regulatory and quality consulting. So from early stage regulatory strategies to quality systems. A little bit about basically how to catch everybody's attention. When I was thinking about this topic, I thought, how about I quote someone who's pretty well renowned, the CEO of Edwards Life Sciences. I was hearing him in a presentation last year, and he provided some advice. He said, if you're not thinking globally, you're missing a lot. And he highly recommended this book called Factfulness. Phenomenal read. It's written by Hans Rosling, and basically the thesis is that there's a lot of misinformation. We lack a lot of knowledge, and he based the book on even surveys done at United Nations of all places, and people were misinformed. But really, there's a lot. The global mindset is the mindset of the future, and in doing so, I'd like to open the discussion here today. So let's see if I can do this appropriately. Hans, the author of that book, founded an organization called Gapminder, and basically is data analysis. It's just phenomenal amount of information for data analysis. And basically, I'm projecting here the life expectancy, the income, and the population given by the size of the balls here. And let's just introduce the topic. Let's look at how the countries that are at hand of interest play out since 1901. So we look at the United States, interestingly, is growing in terms of income per capita. A lot of fluctuation in Singapore. We're getting down to 1970s where Singapore becomes an economic miracle and surpasses. South Korea becomes a world production. Philippines is growing a lot too. And interestingly, from this graph, it's just kind of telling a story. The world is progressing. There's tremendous opportunities in these growing emerging markets to really make an impact, both healthcare, quality of life, but also in terms of profitability. So I've included a link to that presentation chart, and I welcome people to sort of take a little bit of a view there. So more of the static level in terms of economics for 2009. Here's what I found in terms of population. Philippines is big. I'm including the United States as a benchmark because I was asked to also cover the United States for those companies in Asia Pacific interested in coming here. So GDP per capita, as we see, Singapore is slightly higher, but the population is less. You know, the GDP, we'll look at Singapore and Philippines being about roughly the same. Philippines actually being larger, but having a tremendously larger population. Exports is interesting to look at that. South Korea is a big exporting country. Philippines is a big importing country, and the such. So that kind of lays the land a little bit for the topic today. So in terms of healthcare products, let's think about the first question is, do you have a regulated product? And that question really is different for each country. Medical devices and IVDs and diagnostics are regulated products. And given the nature of our firm, I will go into depth a little bit about how to get products registered there. But there's a whole other side where products are, there's an open market. They're foods, apps, and cosmetics. And this is a good representation sort of what people think, but there is more to it. For medical devices, there's a lot of technology. There's monitors, there's software medical devices people should think about, and also in terms of wellness, apps are growing tremendously. And so I was just gonna jump right into it. Advice for non-regulated products and also probably regulated products. The first level of advice I would suggest is leverage the digital economy. With COVID-19, the more so, right? We'd be probably united in a room today, but we are all united in our respective office. So the world is going to change. And this is a strength that we can be leveraged by small players, by SMEs. And I encourage people to think of that as a strength. Leverage local resources and opportunities, looking at what specifically about each country can we really target and address, or how is the healthcare system working there? For example, in Asia, traditional medicine is important. So how can that potentially be leveraged? And then mitigate risk. Don't ignore the big challenges that you'll have ahead, but actually work straight on to address them. It's very important to establish local support. This conference perhaps might allow an opportunity to do so. Think about how you could have digital marketing campaigns, how to reach people through social media, for example, how to encourage more local users and consumer groups. They can carry a lot of influence. Distributors, that's probably the standard way to market, but it doesn't have to be anymore, but it can be. You should consider regional versus national and interview them very carefully. If you have a good product, odds are you're being knocked on the door quite often about about your product, but make sure that you do your due diligence. Conduct SWOT analysis. That's strength, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Is there less competition in that country or more? Think about intellectual property. Is there a risk that your product might be copied? How's the legal framework? Also think about import tariffs and logistics. So that's a very quick look at non-regular products. Now let's look at, first of all, COVID update and emergency use authorizations. What I was asked, what's happening in the US and are there opportunities there? There's tremendous amount of opportunities for entrepreneurs. So we'll cover that very briefly, and then we'll look at efficient regulatory and commercialization processes for FDA, Singapore, Philippines, and Korea. So the first update is that in reality, we are in a challenging time. Countries have adopted a self-protection sort of mindset, and there's been bans on the export of COVID-related medical products. Here's a number of countries that were affected or implemented a face and eye protection ban on exports. And these two charts come from April, but they're pretty reflective that you have to be careful if you're looking into this, that from your own country, there might be limitations on being able to export products. I'm just wanting to mention that. So the famous emergency use authorizations, EUAs, the FDA has taken, the mandate to approve products very quickly so that they can address needs. And here's a high-level criteria for EUAs. If you're in Asia Pacific, these are tremendous opportunities. It has to treat, a pandemic, coronavirus related, scientific belief that the product is effective. And looking at how many have been approved, we have 208 molecular and serology diagnostics approved, 35 CLIA labs, that's sort of laboratory testing facilities, 20 personal protective equipment, and 26 ventilators. Here's a link to being able to see all of them and the evidence that was provided. But just be careful, the EUA is not an approval, it's basically a clearance. And so that can be revoked and will be whenever the pandemic is done. And so companies need to be very careful to use the real world evidence that they're capturing by the use of their product to create an actual file, and they need to go through the approval. The waivers are general controls, quality system, FDA registrations, but they're not waiving adverse event reporting recalls, and you should not be making a claim of FDA approved. So jumping real quickly on the US classification and requirements, class 1 products are basically our notification. These are products that have very low risk with the US. Class 2 products are 510Ks. We'll jump to little more in detail. Class 3 products are the products that are have a high level of risk, like including implantable defibrillators and such. There's two main areas of requirements. You have the quality system and you have the technical file. From a technical file, you have to write, how the product was tested, how it's manufactured. The quality system is what oversees the production of it and ensures that you're meeting the requirements. So this is the view that FDA takes, right? Let's look at how this compares. I've talked about the emergency use authorization, how this compares to our countries of target in Asia Pacific. So first of all, please note the health authorities. For Singapore, it's health science authorities. For Korea, it recently changed to the Ministry of Food and Drug Safety. It used to be called KFDA. In the Philippines, you have the PFDA. So I wanted to introduce the topic by looking at introducing the Global Harmonization Task Force. It's a great idea. It founded in 1993. You see key players in the regulatory world for medical devices. But in 2012, the GSTH was converted to INDRF. And now we see here Singapore and South Korea, of which we're talking about today. They're at the table and they're determining how globally medical devices are going to be regulated. And so my point is, if we're studying this, if we're following this when we're developing a medical device, the opportunities are very vast and open to being able to commercialize the product globally. Let's compare the GSTF, which is currently still being used for classifying medical devices, to the US. In the US, the products are classified by codes. So you look up a code and see if it matches. If it doesn't, you have a de novo 510K, for example. And then you have regulatory intervention by class that's similar to the GSTH. Clinical evidence or predication as a means of compliance. By GSTF, you have standards as means of compliance. You have to look at the ISO standards. And you do have to have in both places an appointment of a local representative. So there are synergies. And that's my thesis today, that if you're thinking globally from day one, these opportunities should be open. Here's a little bit of more detail about the differences. All jurisdictions with the GSTH model have similar processes, but there's some country-specific considerations. Classification of products, they're all not all the same. So when you're going to Singapore or you're going to Philippines, you got to think about, make sure the classification is the same. The level of clinical evidence might not be the same. There's a declared for conformity and essential principles. But what is the same is that expectation that you have a standardized technical file. And this is summary. This is what's included. It's a good practice. So companies should be laying that foundation. If you want to be efficient from a regulatory standpoint, lay the foundations with this information in your technical file. So jumping in, introducing Association of Southeast Asian Nations. A little bit about it is they are actually not a union, but they're a political and economic alliance. Each country has its own regulation and policies, and they have implemented the ASEAN Medical Device Directive. It was signed by 10 countries in 2014, entered into force 2015, but it's non-legally binding. So there's actually harmonization requirements that each country needs to have. And on a global level, looking at ASEAN, if you look at it as a single entity, it's the 6th largest economy in the world after US, China, Germany, for example. So it's a large, and it's about 88.8% of the world population. Now looking at Singapore, it's known for its highest GDP per capita, longest life expectancy. So very sophisticated market. And then looking at Philippines, it's slated to be the 10th largest economy by itself in the world. It's just phenomenal, and the largest population in all ASEAN. Jumping into a regulatory framework, here's what you'll need if you're a US manufacturer going into Philippines. You do the license holders who owns the license. It could be for the Philippines, your own entity abroad. It could be a distributor or a third party. Third party being like a regulatory consultant, for example, or a distributor. You need an importer, needs to be the license holder. So you need a local entity to be the importer. And from a distributor, any entity appointed by the license holder with a license to operate for medical devices can be in the Philippines. I'm going to add a little bit about Philippines healthcare market. It's dominated by the private sector. It's largely dependent on imports, and imports about close to 100% of its medical devices and about 65% of diagnostics. looking at Singapore, you need you could be its own entity, it could be an importer or distributor, and it could be a third party. Any entity with good distribution practices or ISO 13485 can be the importer. And in terms of distributor, you also need the good distribution practices. Talking a little bit about Singapore, its business language is English, so all regulatory submissions are done in English and don't really have that requirement of need of translation, which you do need for the Philippines. And the Philippines are notoriously strict about this. And there's a lot of opportunities there from a healthcare sector standpoint. So I'm going to rush through here. Korea is a big player in the medical device. I've done an analysis last year on the submissions for medical devices to the US. It's the third after China, the US, China, and Korea. Korea has basically its own regulatory framework. There needs to be type testing for some products. That means that new preclinical testing is done there. It's similar to GFTH in that the level of review is according to the risk classification. And then there is some question about clinical data. They might require you to have in-country clinical data. Well, that went fast, and I promised that I was going to be fast. So give me a couple minutes here. Just in wrapping it up, the regulatory frameworks are working to converge, and that's great truth and a good reality in this world. Setting the foundation for quality systems like technical files is the most efficient way to obtain regulatory approvals. We talked about how they're convergent to the IMDRF standpoint. Singapore, Korea, South Korea, and Philippines generally are following the GSGF classification framework in the IMDRF process. One approval fits all is not yet possible, but it's moving in that direction. And then from a commercialization standpoint, consider new ways of doing business. Consider telemedicine and local groups. And then, emerging markets constitute a great opportunity. I'm going to add a couple of sort of housekeeping here. I was a big proponent for this. If you have a company, if you're online, please submit your 550-word abstract to this email so we can possibly feature you in the next forum. We're going to have next forums. I want to talk about that. And if you have a product you want to pitch or a service, send a 1-minute video, and we're looking at being able to feature them for the upcoming programs. These are the upcoming programs. The Philippines coming next on October 8th. Mark your calendar. South Korea, November 19th. To Singapore, February 12th. I wanted to mention some key resources are here for what I just covered very briefly. And then additional key resources. These people are phenomenal, great resources to be utilized for people to export. I mean, we're talking about specialized law firms, the Korean American Chamber of Commerce. We saw consulates that join in, logistics experts. So as a fellow business development expert, I really want to encourage you to take action to explore these markets, whether it be you coming to the US or Korea or Singapore or Philippines. The doors are open, even though in this lockdown, and it's ours to get, in terms of directing the growth for the future. At this point, I'll hand it over, I guess, to some Q&A if we have time.
Yes, okay, thank you so much, Luis, for that. And just so that everyone knows that these resources will be available, and I'll talk about that at the end in a directory, but we do have one question in the remaining time that we have for the Q&A regarding the keynote from Rafael Gutierrez Loesa. It says, do you believe there will ever be a plateau in either Philippines, Korea, or Singapore in regards to healthcare growth?
A plateau. Well, it's a very interesting question. To the extent that these countries, as you saw, they're growing immensely, almost shortening the gap, on GDP per capita. And that's where the world is slated. If we work, as a humanity together, we have one country, a globe, one planet that we share. I believe that they're in early stages. Korea is very advanced in Singapore, but Philippines has a long ways to go in terms of the health and growth opportunities there. So I don't see like that should be a restriction on seeking exports or imports into these countries. In fact, I see globally that there's an opportunity. We're seeing it with the pandemic that anything related to healthcare seems to be recession-proof, and that says a lot about this industry and economy.
Okay, and I think we have 4 minutes, so if anyone else wants to ask a question in the few minutes that we have remaining, you can ask your question in the chat. But if not, I'll go ahead and just wrap up one question that I do have for Luis, where you talked about the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or ASEAN, and the Medical Device Directive. And if you could just expand on the efforts to harmonize the MDD for ASEAN.
Yeah, great question. And as we saw, that includes both Singapore and Philippines. So we saw that it's voluntary, right? And in each country, it's a different level of maturity of implementation. I can say that for Singapore, they're spearheading it. And so essentially, if you have a CE mark or European, you can get approval there very quickly. We've been successful at leveraging 510Ks, US approvals also, and possibly Japanese approvals to get approval. And then in Philippines, they're a little bit, going in that direction. It's a little challenging because they had already their own medical device regulations, so they're overhauling it, but they're making strong and steady progress towards that. So it's an effort that needs to be applied. It's complex, but moving forward in the objectives that they have on providing better healthcare for all and more attractiveness as a region as a whole. And so something to keep a very close eye on is that harmonization efforts.
Okay, great. And just one last question from Gloria Hernandez. Do you expect many new business relationships to transpire due to this unfortunate, quote unquote, opportunity? Or will they deplete when the virus calms down and it seems like a great opportunity for new businesses to get their foot in the door?
Yeah, thank you very much for that question. This program is addressed specifically at small business, right? Relatively small businesses. I personally feel as a fellow entrepreneur that the world is ours to have. Think about the Goliath versus David analogy, and there's a great book about this. The world is changing and the opportunities are out to be held, and I don't think that it's transient. Most of the experts predict that this pandemic is going to just highlight the increasing need for better prevention, preventative, better tracking, better diagnostic. And so I believe there'll be a lot more collaboration, more opportunities of business relationships and collaboration at a global scale. I mean, we're within history, and history will not be the same after this. In fact, we're bracing ourselves as a race. We're all in lockdown, basically 90% of the world economy. And so there's going to be lasting and long-felt changes.
Okay, well, great. Thank you so much, Luis, for that insight and the resources as well. So we really appreciate your keynote remarks. And so for those who have just joined, I see that a number of people are still joining us, which is great to take part in this opportunity. Again, I'm Sarita Jackson, and I am the event moderator from the Global Research Institute of International Trade. And so now we're going to shift into our moderated panel discussion. And so we have 3 individuals here. I will introduce them and look forward to having a discussion with them for the next 30 minutes to expand on many of the points mentioned by Luis and to get their perspective from different countries on what's going on in the healthcare industry. So we will start with Cheryl Ramos Quintana. So she can just raise her hand, who is the president of the Philippine Franchise Association and the founder and president of Orispa Spa Solutions, Inc. So welcome.
Hi.
Okay, and next we have William Choi, who is here with us, who is the CEO of Posture 360, the world's first integrated posture products and platform technology company. Welcome, Mr. Choi.
Hello and good morning and good evening, everybody.
And with us, Ms. Olive Tai, who is the co-founder of Synergy, a leading e-commerce enabler in Southeast Asia, headquartered in Singapore. Hello, Ms. Tai.
Hello, everyone.
Okay, Okay, well, thank you so much for being with us. And I'm going to start off with my first question directed toward Ms. Quintana. Ms. Quintana, what opportunities for growth does the Philippines offer for a U.S. small, medium-sized enterprise, or SME, in the health and wellness industry, especially using the franchising model?
Yes, thank you for that, Sarita. As we've learned from the discussions from Luis, and also taking a note at the opportunities abound now in the Philippines for entrepreneurs in the health and wellness sector, since the pandemic exposed, sadly, the incapacity of the health sector to address the needs of the populace. Areas that one may take a look at, aside from the exportation or us importing the products, is going into manufacturing here in the Philippines, as there is an increase in government spending and also a lot of incentive programs given to local to manufacturers, investors that are going to locate here. In fact, just recently, the Board of Investments of the Department of Trade and Industry here in the Philippines have reiterated incentive programs geared towards those who will manufacture products in the health and wellness sector. Also, areas that one may take a look at is the research and development. Since we have a great wealth of talent in the human resource in the country for the sector, we're capacitated to help out for those investors to go into this area, as well as the health and services in the franchising model. The Philippine franchising sector has been a great contributor to the GDP of the country, and we're in fact responsible for over 200,000 outlets or businesses in the Philippines. And this is a high time for everyone to take a look at this model to expand. Since if you are, specifically, if you're an American company in the health and wellness sector, you may be encouraged to come here and look for a partner to expand your brand or your company in the Philippines. I think that's it. And yeah, I look forward to more businesses coming over here.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. And just before I move on, I'm going to ask the same question of the other two, but just so that everyone knows that we will have time for Q&A after our moderated discussion as well. So William, I'd like to direct the same question to you in terms of South Korea, and what are some of the opportunities, particularly in the medtech industry, for growth in South Korea?
Well, the medtech industry has actually been rapidly growing in South Korea, especially over the last 5 years. Over 60% of the imports are medtech devices from foreign companies. And probably as well with the fastest aging population in Korea, hitting the age of 65 by the year 2025. Obviously, you know, there would be a lot of opportunity in that area as well as more non-communicable diseases like diabetes and hypertension. And the government has also invested about $1 billion this year. They've made that announcement in May into life sciences, AI, and biopharmaceuticals. And so I would almost, and of course with the COVID situation, South Korea has actually really established themselves on the map and the way they've actually handled the pandemic. And so, which boosted the reputation and I guess the innovation area of med tech in South Korea, putting us on the map. And so, with all of this happening, I would say that the appetite, when you're looking at the growth and the boom and the government support, because a lot of the innovation that's actually happening within South Korea is driven by the government. And so, when you have these companies being able to understand and really innovate, and with 63% or over 60% of medtech devices actually being imported into South Korea, and the appetite for innovation, that really brings a really good, I would say, value or leverage or symbiotic relationship with possible joint ventures or possible R&D opportunities between foreign SMEs and as well as domestic SMEs. And I say SMEs and small to medium-sized businesses in the medtech sector because you know, that's where most of the innovation happens. Now we could also say that, you know, a lot of these big corporates are you know, looking towards innovation, but they will never be able to work at the level of speed and I guess open-mindedness and flexibility as the SMEs are able to move. I still believe that the corporates and globally, but as well as in South Korea, are still very rigid in terms of movement. And they're still very, I guess, say bricks and mortar thinking in the sense of they still have this sense of, well, let me give you an example. For example, just, you know, on a financial perspective, about stock markets, for example, you know, biotech is soaring. That's pretty much the only sector that is booming in terms of medtech in South Korea because there isn't anything else. And so the opportunity for SMEs in Korea that are being able to have the opportunity for innovation and the opportunities to collaborate with foreign SMEs in this area, I think would be, is actually, I believe, would be the driving force for economic development in South Korea.
Okay, great. And let me just, with William, I just want to piggyback off of your last comment, then I'm going to go to Olive. So you were talking about collaboration, and I saw a recent online article published by Asian Options where you highlight the emphasis on those opportunities that arise from, quote, leveraging collaborations that build value. So if you can just go into a little bit more detail for the SMEs, what are the best ways to establish the right partnerships in South Korea in the med tech sector, just the healthcare industry, generally speaking?
Sorry, was that question directed
Towards
to me?
William. Yes, yeah, towards you.
Oh, I'm
yes.
so sorry. I thought you were moving on to someone else.
I was piggybacking off of your last comment.
I'm sorry. I wasn't really. Can you repeat that? I'm so sorry. I thought you were moving on to someone else.
No, sorry.
Okay. Can you, sorry, just
I can
really
repeat
quick.
it. Yeah, no problem.
Yeah,
Only
I'm so
because you
sorry
had
about
mentioned
this.
the collaboration, so I said might as well continue with that particular theme. So there was an article published where you were interviewed in Asia Options online, and so you highlighted the emphasis on the opportunities that arise from leveraging these collaborations that build value. And so my question was, for the SMEs, what are the best ways to go about doing that, leveraging those added value collaborations in South Korea?
Well, I mean, I think, you know, good old networking, just to kind of take the top end on that one, and to be able to work and maybe contact your local associations that have, you know, these sort of global access programs, and being able to you know, get those introductions with other SMEs is obviously the you know, one of the most general steps that we could take. The other one is to find companies that have already or that are seeking to receive government programs. So I think it would be really good to say, for example, you know, there's one organization that I work with called the ICTC, the International Cooperative Development of Tax, and I forget what the actual thing was, and I'll send it, which helps SMEs, global SMEs, penetrate South Korea, as well as South Korean SMEs to go outside. There's, you know, other ones like KIMES, which is KIMES, which is a trade, one of the biggest medical device conferences in South Korea. But I would start, you know, with the local, you know, those that have the sort of the network and that sort of bring collaboration, such as programs like this, like the Global Access, to really help with, you know, to understand, get some intelligence, and then really engage with other SMEs. You know, South Korea is highly innovative, but at the same time, it's still, there's still challenges in the way that it's trying to export its growth. And so if you approach from the foreign side and coming into South Korea, I think the response would be quite swift, would be fast, because I think that I believe that foreign companies that are keen to enter into South Korea would be very well received. And so I think that sorry, was there a second question to that one? I can't remember. Hello?
Oh, yeah, I don't know how I got mute. Yes, that was it. So you answered the question very well, and thank you so much for providing resources so that those who are on could actually tap into some of those resources, because that's so key. So I really appreciate that. So now I'm going to bring the first question to Olive in terms of what you're seeing with the opportunities through the use of e-commerce, and particularly your platform for healthcare products and medical devices.
Thank you. So first of all, I think everyone knows that Singapore is definitely one of the smallest population in Southeast Asia. But when you look at the numbers, in terms of the per capita, we are actually one of the highest. So I think with the government focus and investment, health sector is definitely one of the fastest growing sector in Singapore. And if you look at that, just now Luis also mentioned that you need to have an importer or distributor to actually help you guys do the registration to bring in the product. So Synergy, it is a platform that for all our SMEs or overseas SMEs to leverage on, and we can help them to work with all the different associations like HSA or FDA in Philippines to help them to import the products into the region. And if you notice that in Southeast Asia, we have our e-commerce industry is already definitely growing because of the pandemic, and it just brings forward the growth significantly recently. If you really want to penetrate to the Southeast Asia, coming to the e-commerce industry is actually one of the fastest options for you guys. And if you really want to test out the water in the region, I think choosing Singapore definitely is also one of the fastest channel for you guys, because if you look at the HSA regulation, and Luis also mentioned that if Singapore is actually one of the simplest, fastest and easiest in terms of doing the registration for the product as well. So that's how I see that this opportunity in Singapore. Yeah, Singapore could be one of the gateway, can be your gateway to penetrate to the Southeast Asia.
All right, okay, and sticking with Olive, just to piggyback again on some of the trends and the things that you're seeing, and then the particular countries where you would see for an SME to consider. But are there challenges or risks that you've seen that a U.S. small, medium-sized enterprise should also take into account?
Okay. So as I mentioned, opportunities are really there. There's a lot of potential for the SME to penetrate right now. But not forgetting nowadays, because we are talking about online, a lot of people also forget that online world is very different to the offline world. We are competing with like thousands of merchants in the online world. So a lot of SME always forget about, putting the right marketing strategy, managing the digital marketing to get awareness, on the digital line, the online world. At the same time, I think because of the pandemic, people actually nowadays is not really, are a bit afraid to go out and shop at a physical store. So and the supply chain for the e-commerce is actually getting more and more important, because people, if you want to sell online, you have to make sure that you will be able to reach out to the consumer directly. So in this region, now we are also not talking about domestic supply chain, we're talking about cross-border supply chain. So these are the things that we always have to iron out with the things that you guys want to penetrate in the region, whether we can actually do it locally or we can also do it at a regional level. And at the same time, I think the other challenges that we always face is the customer expectation nowadays. Because of the pandemic, the supply chain limitation that we have, And a lot of customer always want the products really fast. The demand is there, but the supply chain limitation is always there as well. So these are the few challenges that we have been facing in the past couple of months during pandemic. But of course, as a synergy platform, using synergy platform, this is something that we already have established. We already experienced. So if you can leverage on our platform, it will be a lot more easier to sort out all these challenges as well.
Okay. Great, thank you so much for that. And now going back to Sharil, I have a question for you in terms of what recommendations do you have for USMEs looking for franchising opportunities in the Philippines?
Well, as I've discussed earlier, there is really a huge opportunity now for entrepreneurs to come in over and start their businesses here and locate here. Of course, the fastest is through e-commerce, specifically for those who wanted to go into the retail sector. But with the increase of beefing up the manufacturing sector here locally, and we've seen also a lot of efforts from the government in terms of the stimulus packages that are being provided for, one of which is the Corporate Recovery and Tax Incentive Enterprises Program, as well as those locating here for locally producing the products here. My recommendations is topmost, of course, is to seek for a appropriate partner or the local or the country franchisee here to serve for you to expand locally. With franchising being with the Philippines being the foremost in terms of franchising in Southeast Asia, this is the best time to come in over. And in fact, because there are two ways of looking at the situation, and a lot of concerns now with the unemployment rate going up locally, but with that opportunity also seeing a lot of those who lost their jobs and those who went back to the country are looking into entrepreneurship as their way to go. And so you now have a wealth of local talent and also those who wanted to start their entrepreneurship journey here to provide as partners for you. And so the other recommendation is that if you come in over, of course, you have to seek someone to help you get started in terms of navigating the legal side of licensing your company here in the Philippines.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Now, that was very helpful information in terms of the government incentives, the programs, and then once again, revisiting this idea of partnerships, forming the local partnerships. So now we're going to transition. Some questions are coming through. I'm going to open it up to Q&A. So if anyone has any questions, go ahead and add it to the chat. So the first one is from Lynn Z. That says, I operate a small language tutoring business. Are there any resources for educational services in Asia, such as online English tutoring and instruction? And so I will open that up. It's not directed to any specific person, so whoever wants to take that question.
Yeah, so maybe I'll just start. Yeah, so absolutely, in terms of the education or the ed tech side will actually start to increase quite significantly. A lot of the offline English schools, private schools, have been shutting down simply because they found quite just as being able to learn English with the recent technology such as Zoom, like what we're talking on right now, is actually far advanced, and being able to take online classes is actually is becoming a lot more of a much more efficient approach with the same level of education. So I would say that now that online English tutoring is starting to become a growth side on the education, I think there's a lot of great opportunities there. Now, when it comes to marketing, marketing is marketing, right? that is something that you know, either you would have to partner with a marketing firm, which I probably, you know, that's always a hit and miss, that understands social media and digital marketing here in Korea, or you could find a local partner that understands and has already have the proven in terms of digital marketing. But you know, again, if it's a business, you know, when you're dealing with any sort of marketing, I mean, that's always a challenge in any business.
Great, thank you so much, William. We have some other questions coming through. This one is directed toward Olive. Oh, let me just Olive, what are your expansion plans for the future? From Yesenia Morales.
Okay, a lot of people actually nowadays talking about cross-border e-commerce. So what we are actually really looking at is that we're no longer just looking at domestic, you know, e-commerce anymore. We are talking about helping Singapore SME to sell into other countries as well, in a global, even like globally. And it's also talking about intra-ASEAN network as well. So, and recently we just opened up another entity in Hong Kong. We realized that quite a number of companies, they actually set up in other countries, which is Hong Kong, as an Asia Pacific hub, that we're helping those markets to sell the products for the Southeast Asia markets as well. So our expansion plan right now is still pretty much on Southeast Asia, but helping SME overseas to come to Southeast Asia, but as well as for the SME overseas to sell to the Western countries as well. So this is what we are currently planning to do. Yeah.
Great, thank you so much, Olive. Here's another one that says, I buy and sell medical imaging equipment such as MRI and CT scanners, X-ray machines, have a business here in the States, and I have an associate that lives in the Philippines that does similar work. So let me get to the question here. Okay, it doesn't, and I think you guys can see this, it doesn't really have a question. I have an associate that lives in the Philippines, realize that the government, the churches usually run most of the business. Okay, here we go. How can I set up a business in the Philippines to be able to send equipment there and market to the government and to the churches?
Well, one of the trends that we're seeing now, Sarita, is actually globalization through digitalization. So he or she can actually access the market right away by bridging technology with what she's doing and accessing the market right away. Now, in terms of selling to the government, so I've mentioned earlier that there is really an increase now in terms of government spending towards that need, addressing that need of the populace. And so I think that there is a great potential for that company to come over and sell the products here.
Okay, and the next question, which is probably building off of what you were talking about with globalization, from Amir Alab. When it comes to globalization, are there methods to localize the healthcare devices, especially since the cultures and habits of different cultures vary? So how are those devices marketed in the different countries?
Yeah, so because initially people will look at it as quickly to access the market is to export the products here. But as I've mentioned, that there are a lot of stimulus programs being addressed to those who wanted to locate here. He or she may take a look at locating here so that when she's able to manufacture locally the products, it will be much easier also for her to sell to the market. And if I may share also, with the pandemic, and also there's a rise of local patronage for products that are manufactured locally, or homegrown products. They can leverage on that potential.
Okay, great. Well, we have a couple of minutes left, so we'll take one more question from Jonathan Petalver. Are there any products or services that you can immediately promote or market here in the Philippines We are a group of global Filipino entrepreneurs looking at expanding our pipeline and inventory. We have been in the business for more than a decade.
I lost you, Sarita. What was the question?
I'll read it again. Okay. Are there any products or services that you can immediately promote or market in the Philippines? We are a group of global Filipino entrepreneurs looking at expanding our pipeline and inventory. They've been in the business for more than a decade.
Yeah, what we've seen also in terms of the franchising sector, a lot of franchisors also pivoted in the past months from their traditional way of doing business or their core competencies to taking in a lot of inventories and products that are into servicing the medical sector as well as the health and wellness sector. So these are actually geared towards the medtech services as well as the products in there. Also a lot of manufacturing for the PPEs and the ventilators. So those are the top products that are being sought on of the market.
Okay. Well, thank you so much to all three panelists for your in-depth insight and for your time for answering the questions from all of our participants. So now we are going to move into the breakout room. So there should be information that you can see moving us into the 3 different breakout rooms where you can meet with each of our panelists directly, and they will discuss a little bit more about their products or services, and you can ask questions of them in the breakout rooms. Thank you. Yeah, there we go. Okay, the next step. So the Center for Global Management Partner Connect that I mentioned, the Korean American Chamber of Commerce, Orange County Virtual Expo, for any companies that are looking for any kind of research, quality, customized market research, reach out. The email address is at the bottom, cgm@csusb.edu. And then lastly, there was a question that came to me privately, so this addresses that after today's event, there will be a Global Access Program Business Directory, which will have the contact information for the participants as well as our panelists and many of the resources that were highlighted earlier, as well as an opportunity to pitch your product. So get more details, send an email again, cgm@csusb.edu. And then don't forget our next series, part 2, join us on October 8th. There we go, October 8th, where we will focus solely on the Philippines and the particular industries, fashion, beauty products, and retail services. So we hope that you go ahead, register, join us in October, and thank you so much. And may everyone enjoy the rest of your day.